Okay, we're going to be looking at World War One. This topic will complete Unit 2, and a lot of this is European history. We need to see how the war got started, where it came from, and then what the United States did about it, how President Wilson tried to keep us out of it, why he took us into it, and how it changed this country. And the changes are very great. Okay. This was a horrific, not entirely unexpected war, but what was unexpected about it was just how, to use the word again, horrific it was. This was bloodletting on an unimaginable scale. And so, to just plunge in, what long term back factors contributed to the outbreak of World War One, which was not known, of course, as World War One at the time. It was referred to either as the Great War or the World War. I think the Great War predominated. Well, they didn't know there was going to be a two. Okay. There was a whole lot of analysis after the war was over trying to explain how this thing could have happened. It just, what happens, of course, is that a lot of international mechanisms that had been put in place to try to make war less likely succeeded only in making it worse when it came. So this thing claimed an 8-figure number of human lives, over 20 million, more civilian than military. And this was a European culture previous to the war, which was supremely confident of its superiority and how war was a thing of the past. Science was making moral progress possible. And then this war comes along, and it just doesn't seem to make any sense. And in fact, it didn't. So, how do you explain it? All right, background factors. One of them is nationalism. I'm not saying that nationalism in itself is a bad thing, but like anything else, it can be carried to an excessive degree. And Europeans in the late 19th and early 20th century, they were fanatically nationalistic. Okay, Britain had been united as basically a nation since about the 9th century. France was a bit more recent than that. Modern nationalism, was born in the early days of the French Revolution in the early 1790s. Germany and Italy were both come late to the party. Italy had not been politically united since the fall of the Western Roman Empire, 1400 years earlier, and Italy united politically in 1866. Prior to that, there were several different countries with governments and all of that shared a language and a general culture. Germany had been far more divided than that. Germany had united in 1871. More on that presently, because that's going to factor in. So sometimes these new nations were just extremely nationalistic. It goes further than that. Um, well, the main powers in Europe would be France and Germany. More on that a little bit later, but you've got France and Germany, you've got Britain. Spain was decrepit and behind economically. Italy was a power. Um, and there was this odd thing that doesn't exist anymore. Now, Austria exists and Hungary exists, but they were united and controlled a whole lot of South Central Europe. Okay? It's called the Austro Hungarian Empire, the dual monarchy. And it included a number of frustrated nationalities, though, where nationalism was just um, extreme. And that's not through being a problem yet. You've got all these frustrated nationalities down there. You had Serbs and you had Croats and you had Albanians and this and that, and they hated each other and were looking for a chance to eliminate each other. And each one wanted their own government, their own territory, national self-determination. Problem was they're intermingled. If I were in a classroom, I would have you pretend that one blank wall of the room was a map of that area, and I've got about 5 or 6 cans of paint, open cans of paint, each color representing a nationality, spatter a bunch of droplets on the wall, spatter a bunch more, different colors. And you might have a village of one kind of people here, and 5 miles down the road, a village of another kind of people. And they have bitter hatreds and enmities going back around 600 or 700 years at least. So that's going to be a problem. Okay. So nationalism, and even in supposedly civilized countries, France, Germany, Britain, you have a whole generation of fanatically loyal young men who, not knowing what they're getting into, would enthusiastically sign up to fight for their country's honor and maybe reclaim some scrap of real estate deemed by the leaders as being necessary for the nation's honor, glory, whatever. So, like anything else, it can be carried to an extreme. Like anything else, it does have its useful place. So you have that. Um, you have an intertwining system of alliances, which were defensive in nature, and their purpose was basically just to price war off the market. That you couldn't have a little war, you could only have a big war. Should have worked, it didn't. How it got started was basically this was concurrent with the unification of Germany. There was a brief, lasting only a few months, one battle war between France and the 30 or so German states acting together under the leadership of the King of Prussia, which was the most powerful of the German states. And it's called the Franco-Prussian War. It took place in 1870 and 71, and Prussia won an easy victory, one battle. Okay, and the French, who had been accustomed to being the leading power on the continent of Europe, the Brits had a global empire, but they're an island; they're not on the continent. They they're deeply and bitterly humiliated. Plus, the Germans, having invaded France, chose the French royal palace of Versailles for a little ceremony of a thing where the princes of the various German states acclaimed the King of Prussia, whose name was Wilhelm or William. He was acclaimed as the Kaiser or Emperor of a restored German Reich. You may have heard that Hitler's regime was called the Third Reich. You probably never thought to wonder what the First and Second Reichs were, but here they were. The first one was known, for whatever reason, as the Holy Roman Empire. The French philosopher Voltaire observed that it was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire, but it lasted from the year 962 until 1866. From about the 14th century on, it was completely decentralized. You had a figurehead emperor elected by the princes of the various mutually independent German states. So Germany had always been divided and weak, leaving France as the main power. United, Germany suddenly was larger than France, had a larger population, had a greater industrial base, perhaps significantly greater potential military power. So, France was cruising for a rematch. Okay, been there before. Now, the word Kaiser means emperor. It's the German rendering of Caesar, like the ancient Roman Empire. The Russians claim to be the descendants of the Roman Empire too. Their monarch was the Tsar, another rendering of Caesar. So if you're Julius Caesar, you could call your mom and tell her you made it, because your name would be a word meaning emperor in several languages 2,000 years after your death. Way to go, dude. Well, so the Germans formally reunified to a Second Reich in 1871. All right. So the Kaiser didn't pay a lot of attention to running the government. He left that to a very gifted politician who bore the title of, can't think of it. Doesn't matter that much. But his name was Bismarck, Otto von Bismarck. Bismarck was a realist. He was afraid that Germany had made some mistakes. Specifically, they'd ripped off two provinces in far northeastern France that had been kicked around back and forth over the centuries. They were Alsace, a German-speaking province, and Lorraine, a French-speaking province, between the two countries, where France usually comes to a point in the northeast corner. They just took that back over. By the way, I recommend you look at this in your 8th edition textbook. Page 446 in your 8th edition of U.S. and Narrative History gives you a passable map of Europe. Okay, what Bismarck was afraid of was that France would start another war. He didn't think it'd been a good idea to take those French territories. So, being the head diplomat, he began trying to establish, to cozy up, shall we say, to countries the same ones France might seek help from in getting ready for a rematch war with Germany. What came out of this was a shifting series of alliances that came and went over the next several decades. And on the eve of World War I, you had two major alliance groups. Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy formed the Triple Alliance. Okay, it was defensive in nature. It was meant to discourage anybody from attacking any one of them. And in those days, if a country wants to attack another country, they'll just attack them. It's hard to see that happening today, though maybe not as hard as we might hope. Anyway, if somebody attacks Italy, they'd also have to fight Germany and Austria, and so on. Defensive alliance. So each one was committed to come to the other's aid, or any one of the three. If they're attacked, they're going to have all three of them on their hands. That's supposed to make war less likely. All right? A looser, and I think not as well publicized, maybe even secret, arrangement was the Triple Entente. I'll put it on the screen there. That involved Britain, France, and Russia. It was similar in its intent, but it was not necessarily binding. Now, for France and Russia, it was binding because both of them had very good reason to be afraid of a resurgent, well-armed Germany, which was already behaving in a belligerent manner. Britain, they weren't quite serious about it. Britain thought its main foreign policy obligation was to defend a little country, French-speaking country, by the Netherlands up there called Belgium. The third component, or background factor, was an arms race, just a general military buildup. In the late 19th century, I'm not sure who started this. Could have been the Germans. I think it was, not 100% sure. But they instituted a universal military draft. Now think about that. Universal military draft means that if you're male and you got the requisite number of fingers and toes and all that, you at a certain age, you're going in the army for a number of years, probably around 3. So you draft the entire male population. What this gives you is this gargantuan wartime strength army when there's no war. Now, Germany has already upset the apple cart in terms of the balance of power. They're already showing some signs of saber rattling and being, aggressive. Under their new Tsar, Kaiser Wilhelm I had died end of the 1880s, and his son became Kaiser Wilhelm II, the infamous Kaiser Bill, and he replaced Bismarck and ran things himself. He was a strange man. He would dress up in costume like ancient German heroes and have his portrait done. And I'm not going to have time for this, so this will be in part 2.